John Clayton, the Washington Post's longtime NFL writer, got 5 teams that could surprise this year. See if Philadelphia is one of them. They've got a lot of interesting stories. We'll get into that as well. I want to get John's take on what's going on in the NFL in terms of the preseason, John. It seems that joint practices are in and preseason games are out. Is that the new wave? Are we going to start seeing that is kind of what takes over the NFL decision-making process?
Certainly something that you can see coaches warming up to, because last week there were 16 teams that had joint practices, and most of the coaches in those 16 teams did not even play their starters in the preseason games. In a lot of ways, even though, again, you can risk injury, you can have fights, you can have all those different things in a joint practice. I mean, you're not really risking as much, even though, because, again, you're putting the players out there, and you're going to have first team against second team against third team, all those different things, and you can get more players involved than you can in a preseason game. And so what the trend has been this year in week 1 of the preseason, there was 522 players that didn't play in the first preseason week. And last week, in week 2, it was 565. And a lot of that was because of the fact that you had the 16 teams in dual practices. This week we have, I think, 4 teams having dual practices. So that number's probably going to decline into the 400s. But you can see that you don't want to try to risk injury in some of these preseason games. And ultimately, what you wonder about, will they eliminate the preseason games?
Money talks with that one, John. As we all knew, those owners want to keep those buildings open, but it seems that the coaches or who knows? I mean, there's been some reports here that Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman have kind of been behind not playing them. Do the coaches want to use them, and do the front office guys say, hey, I don't want these guys to get hurt? I guess that'll be something that kind of comes out down the line. But we do have a lot of stories in these preseason that are kind of coming to fruition here. And over at the Washington Post, you have a couple of teams that you think could surprise. So let's look at some of the teams that you like this year that could be surprise candidates. Let's start with one, the Los Angeles Chargers. They're interesting because they've got a lot of talent. They always seem close, but always seem to lose that game in the end. So why is this year different?
Well, the year's different because they made a coaching change. You know, Anthony Lynn got off to a good start last year, and then everything collapsed. And one thing with Anthony Lynn as a coach, for whatever reason, they were just not good in closing games. And so now they got Brandon Staley coming over. You know, he has a chance to establish himself a little bit more. They've got changing from a 4-3 to a 3-4 defense. But when you look at the talent on that team, you know, the 7 teams that had coaching changes, they're the most talented team. You know, they've got Keenan Allen at wide receiver. Justin Herbert was the rookie of the year last year. They made great strides as far as fixing their offensive line, which was horrible last year. And so I think that they have a great chance to be a surprise team, because when you look at them, you know, even though they were 5-11, 6-10 last year, they were a team that you can say this year they should be a wild card playoff team.
All right, another team that I think a lot of people are buzzing about, and there's a couple of prongs to this, is the Denver Broncos. Great roster. They made their decision on quarterback. So kind of talk about the quarterback decision and why they could surprise.
Well, they could surprise because when you look at, now obviously Vic Fangio is on the hot seat because he's had 2 losing seasons, and he was 0-7 in September in his first 2 years as head coach. Well, one of the things that works in his favor is the fact that George Payton, the new general manager, put together now the deepest secondary and the best secondary in the National Football League. They have 3 deep at wide receiver now. The Cortland Sutton's coming back from ACL surgery. Pro Football Focus has them as the 6th best pass-catching group in the National Football League. They're good on the offensive line. They made a decision to go to Teddy Bridgewater. But here's the other thing that helps them out a lot: easy schedule. I mean, they have the 5th easiest schedule in the National Football League. And then when you look, and this is, I think, one of the reasons that Vic ended up taking Teddy Bridgewater and making him the starting quarterback, you look at him in September, they take on the New York Giants, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Jets. That's 9-39 for the record of the teams in the last 9-39 for the September schedule. If they can't start off 2-1, 3-0, Vic's in trouble. But they should, because you can see that Fangio is being aggressive. I mean, he's gone for 6 fourth downs. He's got one of the deepest running back groups. So I think they're in good shape too. And of course, the easy schedule is going to help them out a whole bunch.
John Clayton's with us from the Washington Post. For more on these 5 teams, check out thewashingtonpost.com. You mentioned the Giants. You like them to possibly be a surprise. This NFC East seems to be all over the place.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the things that you can see is that the NFC East schedule, particularly with the fact that you didn't have a winning team in the division, it really stacks up. That's why, for example, you have to figure a surprise team. And I wouldn't include Dallas because, Dallas has Dak Prescott coming back. They've got, 3 good receivers, although right now they got so many things going on with, COVID-19 problems. I think they've got 7 players on the COVID list, including CeeDee Lamb. But somebody in this division has to be a surprise team. Now, Washington, they won the division, so you can't make them a surprise team at 7-9. Yeah, I'm leaning toward the Giants over the Eagles. The Eagles, how about the fact that the Eagles have, the easiest schedule in the National Football League, a 4-17 schedule that only has 5 teams on it with 500 records or better. But I still think, you look at the Giants, I'm not totally sold on them, but, they were 6-10 last year. We'll see if Daniel Jones can do some things. Certainly they're real good on the defensive line. Not certain where they are in the offensive line, but I think they could be a little bit of a surprise team, mainly because of the schedule.
Yeah, as John notes in his Washington Post article, that the Eagles and the Giants deserve consideration. You went with the Giants. We'll see what happens with Philly. Obviously, they've got a lot of questions, and some of it's health-related. Can that offensive line stay healthy? Another team you like is Arizona, which is interesting because you mentioned Vic Fangio on the hot seat. I would imagine that's the case for Cliff Kingsbury as well.
Yeah, and that's it's kind of similar to what Anthony Lynn went through last year. I mean, you look at Arizona; they got off to like a 6-3 start, and then they came back and pretty much only won 2 games the rest of the season, and so they went 2-5 down the stretch. And so if Cliff Kingsbury can't fix up the closing part of the games and the closing part of the second half of the season, then he's going to be out. But, I mean, still, you've got Kyler Murray. The defense did pick up J.J. Watt. They got a good linebacker in Zach Collins who's going to help them out a bunch. Their defense should be better. At wide receiver, they have A.J. Green and DeAndre Hopkins. Not sold where they are at running back. But the tough part for them, they're in the best division in football because the NFC West is so loaded that even if they go 9-7, they still could finish in 4th place. But you still look at the Cardinals and you say, you know what? The 4 teams in the NFC West all have a chance to make the playoffs.
John, the last team on your list is interesting that they would be listed as a surprise after 20 years of domination. But you think the Patriots are primed to bounce back?
I don't know if they're prime. It's funny because, you look at a lot of the preseason ratings that are coming out, and they're like for talent 17th and 16th. But you'd have to think that, there's so many positive things that can get them back over the 7-win season they had last year. Like, for example, Mac Jones is really doing a good job right now. And you look at Cam Newton and you wonder, is he going to be the starter? And I think that's very much in question, particularly after the past week where he was on the COVID list for 5 days because he kind of broke protocol as far as his testing. And, of course, that's to me, that's baffling because you go back to last year, Cam Newton, he got on the positive test on COVID-19. Well, he even admitted how much it affected him for almost like a month. And, he now doesn't get a vaccination. And so he has to be tested every day. To me, that's almost irresponsible because, he hurt himself last year. And you look at the fact that he only averaged like 6.4 yards per attempt passing. And he just didn't have any yards passing the football. But right now, you look, they added 2 $12.5 million tight ends, Nelson Aguilar at $11 million. They added, Kendrick Bourne. Their linebacking core is so much better because they get Highsmith back, or it's like Alonzo Highsmith. And then on top of it, they got Cal Van Noy after he was cut. Bring him back. So they're really in top shape right now. And I don't know if they're going to be good enough to catch Buffalo because I think Buffalo has such a big gap on them at the moment. But I think that they can be And again, it's amazing to say surprise team New England after all those great years with Bill Belichick.
John, I know you're close out there in Seattle with the Seahawks and what's going on out there. We haven't heard a whole heck of a lot from Seattle on the East Coast over here. How are the Seahawks kind of shaping up?
I think shaping up really well. I mean, they've still got a couple issues right now with hold-ins because, Dwayne Brown's a hold-in and he wants some more money, which is understandable. They were able to get a deal done with Jamal Adams at $17.5 million. Now, Quandre Diggs, the other Pro Bowl safety, he's a hold-in just this week because he wants more money, which is understandable because he's making $6.2 million. But, I mean, you look at the fact that, the Seahawks have improved their pass rush. They got Carlos Dunlap, who really helped them last year. They added Kerry Hyder, and they're about 8 deep right now at defensive end, so that helps them out. They were able to go ahead and get Gerald Everett at tight end. They got Chris Carson back on a long-term deal, Tyler Lockett on a long-term deal, and they got the best quarterback in the division in Russell Wilson.
That division seems to be interesting now, and, of course, San Francisco drafted a quarterback at number 2. He's not going to see the field right away, but are the 49ers back this year?
I think so, yeah, but here's my big concern is that, talent-wise, they're back, but I just keep getting concerned about their injury situation. In the last 2 or 3 years, they've been one of the most injured teams in football. Last year, they missed over 135 starts because of injury, and, they're still mounting injuries as training camp goes on. And so you wonder, are the injuries going to hold them back? I mean, certainly the fact that, Jimmy Garoppolo missed 23 of 48 games hasn't helped them out. You look at their defensive line, they had, like 3 ACL injuries and all that stuff. And since 2013, they've led the league in ACL tears. So you kind of wonder, it's like, can they get through the season healthy? And if they do, I think they bounce back.
That division seems to be a very intriguing one. You mentioned Seattle, San Francisco. You like Arizona as a surprise team this year. So you got really all 4 teams you would think in play with the LA Rams and Matthew Stafford out there. This division is going to be a ton of fun to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it really is, because I mean, you say what you want about what they did last year. I'm still amazed that the Rams were the number 1 defense in football, but of course then they lose Brandon Staley as a defensive coordinator. They lose 4 starters on defense. They're better at quarterback with Matthew Stafford, and they suffered a big blow when Cam Akers blew out his Achilles tendon, but they made a great move yesterday getting Sony Michel for a 6th-round pick next year, 4th-round pick in 2023, and that's going to help them out. So it's like they're still close in the mix, and of course they ended up finishing second in the division, but then they ended up beating Seattle in a playoff game.
John, I know a lot of people like Buffalo, Kansas City in the AFC, and obviously you've got Aaron Rodgers back, so Green Bay seems to be Tampa's the defending champ. But is there somebody else that's not getting enough love, in your opinion, to win the whole thing this year?
To win the whole thing, I still wonder. There's so many internal issues right now with Green Bay that they drop back. I mean, Chicago with their offensive line is not going to be good, because that offensive line, Jason Peters and Elijah Wilkerson, a tackle. I mean, are you kidding me? Andy Dalton's going to be QB1, but is he going to be QB dead, with that group of offensive linemen? Minnesota, I think they've got internal problems too. I know they brought a lot of their defensive players back, but you kind of wonder about them. But the NFC right now, in my opinion, is going down. I mean, Tampa Bay obviously is the favorite. They've got Tom Brady, and they brought all their starters back. New Orleans is going to drop significantly. I don't know if Carolina has enough right now to be able to win. But the teams on the rise are the AFC teams. They've got young quarterbacks. They've built their rosters better because, again, with the young quarterbacks, many of them under rookie contracts, you can add more. I mean, you look at the NFC last year, and you had about a lot of older type quarterbacks, and some of those are starting to show their age. Drew Brees, of course, being out. Aaron Rodgers is going to be fine. But overall, I think right now, and the other problem in the NFC is the fact that, with the 17th game, they're all on the road. That doesn't help, because the AFC teams get all the home games with that 17 that 17th game.
Yep.
So I think it's going to make it really tough to see too many teams that are going to make big jumps in the NFC.
Football's back when you hear John Clayton's voice, and of course, it begins on the 9th is when the Thursday night kickoff is. Tomorrow night, we've got Eagles and Jets right here on 97.3 ESPN. John Clayton, the Washington Post. Check out his 5 surprise teams for the upcoming football season. John, we hope to talk to you down the line, pal.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, John Clayton here on the Sports Bash.